Let me ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, even if it's uncomfortable. Have you ever felt like no matter how much effort you put in, no matter how thoughtful you are, no matter how available, kind, or consistent you try to be, you still end up feeling invisible? Like women don't lean in, they lean back. Like conversations fade instead of deepen. Like attraction slips through your fingers, and you're left wondering, what am I doing wrong? I want you to hear this clearly, because no one says it this way. It's not because you're not good enough, and it's not because women are confusing or impossible to understand. It's because value doesn't drop loudly. It drops quietly. Through behaviors men repeat without realizing what they're communicating. And most men never get feedback on this. They just feel the result. As a woman, I've watched this happen over and over again. Not with bad men, not with lazy men, not with men who lack ambition, but with men who care deeply and don't know how to regulate that care. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Attraction isn't destroyed by effort. It's destroyed by emotional leakage. The moments where a man reveals, without saying a word, I need this to work for me to feel okay. And the reason this video might feel confronting is because no one teaches men how attraction responds to emotional positioning, not intention. You were probably taught to communicate clearly, be honest, show interest, be available, and none of those are wrong. But psychology doesn't respond to logic. It responds to emotional signals. Signals like how grounded you are in yourself, whether you can hold uncertainty without collapsing, whether your identity exists independently of her response. Women don't consciously analyze these things. They feel them. And when a man unknowingly communicates insecurity, urgency, or self-abandonment, attraction doesn't disappear out of cruelty. It disappears out of instinct. This video isn't about becoming cold. It's not about playing games. And it's definitely not about manipulation. It's about self-respect expressed emotionally, not verbally. And today, I'm going to walk you through 5 behaviors that quietly lower a man's value, not because he's weak, but because he's unaware. And once you see them, you won't be able to unsee them. Let's start with the most common one, the one almost every man justifies, and the one that feels the most reasonable. 1. Over-explaining yourself. Let me ask you a question. When something feels slightly off with a woman, her tone changes, her replies shorten, her energy shifts, what's your instinct? To explain, to clarify, to make sure you're understood. Maybe you say things like, I just want to be clear. I didn't mean it that way. I hope you don't think I'm... On the surface, this looks mature, even emotionally intelligent. But psychologically, it sends a very different signal. Let me paint a familiar scenario. You send a message. She replies hours later, short, neutral, no warmth. Instead of staying grounded, your mind starts filling the silence. So you send another message, then another. You explain your intentions, your tone, your logic. And without realizing it, you've shifted from presence to defense. Here's the insight most men never hear. Over-explaining is not clarity. It's emotional self-protection. It communicates. I need you to see me a certain way. I need reassurance. I'm uncomfortable holding ambiguity. And attraction doesn't grow in explanation. It grows in emotional stability. When a man over-explains, a woman doesn't think he's considerate. She feels he's unsure of himself. Not because she's judging, but because certainty is felt, not stated. Here's the paradox. The more you try to control how you're perceived, the less solid you feel emotionally. And emotional solidity is what creates safety and attraction. So what's the shift? You stop narrating yourself. You let your actions speak. You allow silence to exist. You trust that your presence doesn't need defending. That doesn't mean being distant. It means being internally anchored. And here's where it gets interesting. Men who stop over-explaining often notice something unexpected. Women start leaning in again, not because he changed her behavior, but because he changed the emotional signal he was sending. So let me leave you with this question, and really sit with it. If you stopped explaining yourself, who would you become in the silence? And more importantly, would you trust that version of yourself? Because the next behavior is what happens when a man doesn't trust himself enough to wait. 2. Chasing clarity instead of presence. Let me ask you something gently, but honestly. When you really like a woman, how long does it take before your mind starts asking for certainty? Not because you're impatient, not because you're needy, but because not knowing starts to feel uncomfortable. You want to know, where do I stand? Is this going somewhere? Does she feel the same way? And so you ask, or you hint, or you subtly push the conversation toward definition. On the surface, that sounds healthy, but psychologically, it often does the opposite of what you want. Let me show you how this plays out in real life. A man meets a woman. Things are good. Easy conversations, laughter, chemistry. Nothing dramatic, nothing wrong. But the moment things start to matter to him, his energy shifts. He starts checking tone, timing, response speed, and eventually he reaches for clarity. Not because the connection needs it, but because he does. Here's the insight most men never hear. Chasing clarity too early is often a way of soothing anxiety, not building connection. And women feel that difference immediately. Presence says, I'm here, I'm grounded, I can enjoy this moment without needing to control the outcome. Clarity chasing says, I need to lock this down so I can relax. And attraction doesn't respond to pressure, even subtle pressure, not because women enjoy uncertainty, but because emotional maturity is revealed through how a man handles uncertainty. Think about it this way. A man who is internally stable can enjoy the unknown without rushing to define it. A man who isn't tries to resolve the unknown as fast as possible. And that difference shows up in tone, timing, and energy, even when the words sound reasonable. This is where many men get confused. They think, I'm just communicating. I'm being honest. I don't want to waste time. And again, none of that is wrong. But psychology doesn't respond to intention. It responds to emotional posture. When you chase clarity before the connection has fully settled, you unintentionally shift the dynamic. She doesn't feel pursued. She feels pulled. Pulled to reassure. Pulled to decide. Pulled to manage your emotional state. And the moment a woman feels responsible for regulating how you feel, attraction starts to fade. Not because she doesn't care, but because polarity dissolves when emotional weight shifts. So what's the mindset shift? You stop trying to secure the future and start anchoring the present. You let connection reveal itself instead of interrogating it. You trust that if something is meant to deepen, it will, without you forcing a verbal checkpoint every time anxiety shows up. This doesn't mean avoiding conversations forever. It means understanding timing. Clarity feels powerful when it comes from calm certainty. It feels heavy when it comes from emotional urgency, and women can feel the difference instantly. Here's the quiet truth. Men who don't chase clarity tend to receive it naturally. Because when you're present, truly present, you create space for desire to grow without pressure. So let me leave you with this question. If you stopped asking where you stand, would your presence be strong enough to let the answer come to you? Because the next behavior is what happens when a man doesn't just seek clarity, he starts seeking validation. And that's where things really begin to shift. 3. Outsourcing your self-worth. The wake-up call. Let me say this calmly, not to criticize you, but to ground you. If a woman's reaction can change how you see yourself, if her attention lifts you and her distance collapses you, then without realizing it, you've handed her something that was never hers to carry, your self-worth. Most men don't notice when this happens. It feels subtle, innocent even. You feel good when she texts. You feel anxious when she doesn't. You feel confident when she's warm. You feel unsure when she pulls back. And slowly, your emotional state begins to orbit around her behavior. Let me give you a real-life scenario. A man meets a woman and feels genuine connection. Nothing unhealthy yet. But over time, he starts adjusting himself based on her reactions. He speaks differently when she seems distant. He doubts himself when she doesn't respond. He feels on when she's engaged and off when she's not. Without saying it out loud, his nervous system is asking, am I okay right now or not? Here's the psychological truth most men never hear. The moment your sense of worth depends on her response, attraction starts reversing roles. Not because you're weak, but because emotional leadership quietly disappears. Women don't want to be the source of your confidence. They want to feel your confidence, steady, internal, unshaken. When a man begins outsourcing his self-worth, a woman doesn't consciously think, he's insecure. She feels, I have to be careful now. I affect him too much. There's pressure here, and pressure suffocates desire. Here's the wake-up moment, delivered with respect. If your mood, confidence, or direction collapses the moment she pulls back, you are no longer relating from strength. You're reacting from fear. And fear doesn't create connection. It creates emotional dependency. Now let me be very clear, because this matters. This is not about being emotionally closed. It's not about pretending you don't care. And it's definitely not about becoming cold. It's about emotional sovereignty. A man who is emotionally sovereign feels deeply, but his sense of self doesn't rise or fall based on someone else's approval. He doesn't need validation to stand tall. He doesn't collapse when someone hesitates. He doesn't chase reassurance to feel okay again. And that's what creates psychological safety. Because when a woman feels that you are grounded with or without her, she can relax into attraction instead of managing your emotions. So what's the shift? You stop asking women to confirm your value, even silently. You reconnect with the parts of your life that existed before her. Your purpose, your rhythm, your standards, your internal compass. You don't withdraw, you don't perform, you simply stand where you are. And something fascinating happens when you do this. Women often feel drawn back, not because you demanded it, but because your emotional center stopped leaking outward. Let me leave you with this question, and it's an important one. If a woman stepped away tomorrow, would you still feel solid in who you are? Because the next behavior reveals what happens when a man forgets himself completely once attraction enters the picture. And that one changes everything. 4. Losing direction. When you like her. Let me ask you something, and take a moment before you answer. When you start liking a woman, does your life stay the same, or does it slowly start revolving around her? Not in a dramatic way, in quiet, almost invisible shifts. You skip a workout because she might text. You delay your plans because you're waiting for her reply. You cancel something important because she's free now. Nothing looks wrong on the surface, but psychologically, something very important just changed. Let me walk you through a familiar situation. A man has a routine, he's focused, he's moving forward, his life has structure, then he meets a woman he's excited about. At first, everything fits naturally, but slowly, his schedule bends, his priorities soften, his direction becomes flexible, not because he chose to change it, but because he didn't protect it. Here's the insight most men don't see until it's too late. When a man loses his direction, he doesn't become more available, he becomes less grounded, and grounding is what creates attraction. Women aren't drawn to busyness, they're drawn to purposeful momentum. When your life suddenly becomes adjustable based on her availability, you're unconsciously communicating, my direction isn't that important. You are the most stable thing in my life right now. That's a heavy position to put someone in, even if you never say it. And here's what often confuses men. They think, I'm just making space. I'm showing interest. I'm being flexible. But psychology hears something different. It hears, I will abandon myself to keep you. And attraction doesn't grow where self-abandonment lives. Not because a woman wants you to be unavailable, but because consistency signals emotional maturity. A man with direction doesn't disappear when he likes someone. He integrates her into his life. He doesn't reorganize his life around her. That difference is subtle, but it's everything. Here's the mindset shift. You don't need to pull away. You don't need to act distant. You don't need to prioritize less. You simply continue to honor your structure. Your goals still matter. Your routines still exist. Your commitments still stand. And when you choose her time, you choose it consciously, not reactively. That tells her something powerful without a single word. This man knows where he's going. And here's the beautiful part. When a man maintains direction, women don't feel ignored. They feel invited into something stable. They feel safe aligning with you instead of becoming your axis. So let me leave you with this question. If you didn't change a single thing about your life when you liked her, would your presence feel stronger or scarier? Because the final behavior reveals what happens when a man waits to be selected instead of choosing himself first, and that shift changes the entire dynamic. 5. Trying to be chosen. Instead of choosing. Let me ask you a question that most men never slow down enough to consider. When you're interested in a woman, do you move as if you're evaluating her, or as if you're waiting for her to decide if you're enough? That difference may sound subtle, but emotionally it changes everything. Let me give you a real-life picture. A man likes a woman, so he becomes agreeable. He adapts. He waits. He doesn't express standards. He observes. He doesn't make decisions. He reacts. He doesn't lead the direction. He follows her pace completely. From the outside, he looks respectful. From the inside, he's hoping. Here's the psychological truth. When a man tries to be chosen, he unconsciously communicates that he has already placed her above himself. And attraction doesn't grow upward. It flows laterally or downward. A woman doesn't want to feel like a prize on a pedestal. She wants to feel like a partner being met. When a man waits to be approved, a woman feels something quietly unsettling. She feels responsible for deciding his value. She feels the weight of leading the emotional dynamic. She feels pressure to either accept or reject, and pressure neutralizes desire. This isn't about dominance. It's about self-selection. A grounded man doesn't wait passively to be evaluated. He engages while observing. He asks himself, how do I feel around her? Does this connection align with my values? Is this mutual, or am I carrying it alone? And here's the paradox. Men who choose themselves first are often chosen more easily, because choosing yourself doesn't mean rejecting others. It means not abandoning your standards in exchange for approval. So what does this look like in real life? It looks like expressing interest without shrinking, having preferences without apologizing, walking away when effort isn't mutual, calmly, without resentment. That energy is rare, and rarity creates value. When a woman feels that you are present by choice, not by hope, attraction stabilizes. She doesn't feel chased. She doesn't feel burdened. She feels met. So let me leave you with this final question before we close this chapter. If you stopped waiting to be chosen, who would you choose to be? Because the conclusion brings all of this together and challenges you to sit with one final uncomfortable truth that most men never hear, but never forget once they do. Let me leave you with one thought, and it may feel uncomfortable at first. A man doesn't lose value because he isn't enough. He loses value the moment he forgets that he already is. Every behavior we talked about today, over-explaining, chasing clarity, outsourcing self-worth, losing direction, waiting to be chosen, they all come from the same place. Not weakness, not failure, but disconnection from self. As a woman, I can tell you this with honesty and respect. What creates attraction isn't perfection, dominance, or mystery. It's emotional steadiness. It's a man who knows who he is, where he's going, and doesn't abandon himself just to be wanted. You don't need to perform. You don't need to convince. You don't need to prove anything. The moment you stand rooted in yourself, relationships stop feeling confusing because you're no longer asking someone else to define you. And if this video made you uncomfortable, that's not a bad sign. It usually means something true just landed. I want to hear from you. Which behavior did you recognize in yourself? Where did you feel resistance or clarity? Leave a comment and share your experience. I read them and I respond, because growth happens in conversation, not silence. I'll leave you with this. The strongest men aren't the ones who are chosen most often. They're the ones who choose themselves, calmly, consistently, and without apology. Carry that with you.